When I first considered moving to China, my mind was filled with a mixture of excitement, but also apprehension. The images and stories that had shaped my understanding of China were far from positive, I will be honest. From the media to conversations with friends and colleagues, I was fed a steady diet of stereotypes and misconceptions. China, I was told, was a land of repression, pollution, government control. It was a place where personal freedoms were non-existent, and the quality of life was subpar. Yet, despite these warnings, I decided to take the plunge and see it for myself. And what I discovered, upon arriving, was one of the biggest realizations of my life. My plane rolled onto the tarmac, and here, standing before me, was a country that defied almost every preconceived notion I had. A country filled with 5,000 years of history. A country of progress. This video will be a reflection on how my views about China have drastically changed since I moved here. As a naive young boy, before coming to China, my primary source of information was, of course, the media. Like many people, I have to say, I did believe the narratives that I saw on the news and read in articles. Could you blame me? I really knew no better. The portrayal of China in Western media was often negative, focusing on issues like human rights, censorship, and environmental concerns. No coverage of China acknowledged the progress and positive aspects of Chinese society. The image painted was one of a dystopian society where people live in fear and poverty, a stark contrast to the reality myself and every other person who steps foot here experiences for themselves. Sure, the country isn't perfect. No country is. And China has issues that they are of course working on. But is it like the China that we see on BBC News back home? Well, no, of course it's not. In my first few months in China, I realised just how biased and incomplete my understanding was. How much I had to relearn. So, it became clear to me that to understand China, to really understand it, I would need to see as much of it as I could firsthand, rather than relying solely on external narratives. So that is exactly what I set out to do. Guangzhou. It's not only absolutely stunning, but it's also surprisingly quiet and peaceful. I mean, for a city that has such a large population, how can it be this peaceful? One of the most significant misconceptions I had was about the quality of life in China. I was under the impression for some reason that living conditions would be harsh for the majority of people, with limited access to modern amenities, the things that we take for granted back home. That the currency was weak and that people couldn't earn enough to survive, or have a good life. I think it's fair to say that this isn't the reality of the situation here. Of course, as you would expect in first-tier cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, the infrastructure is world-class. There's no doubt about that. It surpasses that of many Western cities, most Western cities, perhaps all Western cities. Many Westerners who travel here on the visa-free 144-hour policy that is absolutely shattering narratives. They are as shocked as I was when they see these cities for the first time. Public transportation is efficient, affordable, and incredibly modern. The availability of technology from mobile payment systems to high-speed internet is unparalleled. But it's not even just the first-tier cities that are pulling ahead of the rest of the world. The second and third-tier cities are arguably just as amazing. Of course, people watching this on Bilibili and Chinese social media will think that this is a wealth password, or that by saying this stuff is just an easy way to get views. Westerners watching this on YouTube will say that it's propaganda, that the videos are AI generated, and that the government fill the cities with paid actors to make sure that China has a good image abroad. But the reality is, this is true what I'm saying, whether you choose to believe it or not. The standard of living in urban China is remarkably high, contrary to what I had been led to believe. The cities are clean, safe, and well maintained. The air quality, while still an issue in some places, has improved significantly in recent years. I mean, you can now even see the Beijing skyline all the way from the Great Wall of China. The misconception that China is a backward country with poor living standards is simply not true. In fact, in many ways, China is at the forefront of modern urban living. Now, it may sound to some of you guys like I'm always singing China's praises. Perhaps that is true. But the reality is that there are still so many people out there in the West that simply do not have a single clue as to the reality of what life in China is actually like. They still believe all of those things that they hear on the Western media. They still believe all of those narratives and all that misinformation and all that propaganda. You can click on any video about China on any of the social media platforms in the West, and you'll be met with a steady stream of constant misinformation from people who say the wildest things about China. So as long as those people still exist and believe these narratives that they are fed, I will continue making videos like this one. The ASPI, a notoriously anti-China think tank funded by some other people, just released a report on the 64 key technologies of the future and the countries who are leading the development of those technologies. Now, the report admits that in 57 of the 64 critical technologies of the future, China is leading the way. Another major misconception I had was regarding personal freedoms in China. The narrative I was familiar with suggested that China was a surveillance state, a place where people had little to no freedom, and that you were always being watched. While, of course, it is true that China has a lot of cameras monitoring day-to-day life, really, is that a bad thing? I will challenge anybody to give me an accurate breakdown of why this is actually a bad thing. I am not under the impression that it is. In fact, paradoxically, it gives citizens even more freedom. The freedom to go out at night without fear of being harmed. The freedom for girls to walk the streets without fear of being harassed. The freedom to leave your belongings in the cafe whilst you go to the toilet, and for them to actually be there when you get back. How many countries in the world can you say that that is possible? The freedom to not have your bike stolen or be a victim of petty crime. In my experience, people in China are free to live their lives as they see fit. Of course, you can't go and spread rumours on the internet. That's not good for society. Social media isn't flooded with porn or harassment or damaging content. So while there are, of course, restrictions on certain types of content, that doesn't mean that people go about their daily lives with feeling oppressed or controlled. And surveillance doesn't intrude into your daily life or invade your privacy in any way. That has been my experience so far. Before moving to China, I was told that it was a closed-off society, isolated from the rest of the world. This could not be further from the truth. China may not flood its cities and communities with people of different nationalities and opposing cultures or religions, but that doesn't mean it's a closed society. And of course, that is their choice. So despite this stereotype, China is a country that is in fact deeply connected to the global community. Its first-tier cities are international hubs filled with expatriates and international businesses. Millions and millions and millions of tourists come here each year. The Chinese people in exchange are deeply curious about foreigners and the world, and of course, many millions of young people go off themselves to study or travel abroad too. In fact, many tourism destinations around the world simply would not be able to survive without the amount of tourists that they get from China. Many leading Western universities simply would not be able to survive or function if they didn't have the amount of Chinese students that they do. In fact, China is probably one of the leading exporters of students around the world. One of the most rewarding aspects of living in China, without doubt, has been discovering its cultural richness and diversity. Now, you might think, sitting at home, that China is just one people, and They don't really have any diversity, they're all Chinese. Before coming here, that was kind of my view as well. I have to admit, I had a very singular, monolithic view of Chinese culture, shaped largely, of course, by stereotypes and zero exposure to its depth and variety. What I realise now is that China is a country with a huge range of cultures, languages and traditions. Each province is different in terms of food, histories, clothing, geographically. It's absolutely amazing. But what's more is that each region may have its own unique customs and characteristics, but they all have a singular national identity and are all fundamentally proud of their heritage and that they are Chinese. It's not like in the UK or America where every community is fragmented against each other with lots of infighting. No, they may speak different dialects, have different cuisines, even different faces, but they are all one people, and I think that's great. So, living in China has been an eye-opening experience that has challenged and ultimately changed many of my preconceived notions. The country is far more complex and dynamic than I ever imagined. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that to truly understand a place, you really need to go out there and experience it firsthand. Nothing else will come close. So if you're watching this at home in the West and thinking about visiting China like so many people have been doing recently, why not seize the opportunity presented by the current visa policy and come here? See things for yourself, without a filter of Western media bias. Thanks for watching.